Spooksters, and welcome back. As always, I'm joined by my favorite gal pal, Tara.
Hey, Spooksters.
We'll be wrapping up kind of the Drake aspect of this, and then we'll be going back in a little bit more about Mr. Schneider. But before we do that, let's finish talking about Drake and what happens to Brian Peck. So we left the episode, basically it's October of 2004, and I actually took a picture of the quote that was on the screen. In October of 2004, Brian Peck is sentenced in Van Nuys for child sex abuse. Drake Bell was the minor at the time of the abuse, and therefore, or was a minor at the time of the abuse, and therefore was known as John Doe. The majority of the court was of the record was sealed. So we know the public didn't know. Drake talked about the fact that this was this was before Twitter, definitely before Twitter. It was like right at the beginning of Facebook. And TMZ wasn't real big because the Britney thing hadn't blown them up yet. So he could go to court and not be like harassed. He wasn't like no one following him. No one was figuring this out. And thank God for that. So his identity was remaining hidden. Brian was sentenced. At his sentencing, Brian's entire side was filled with people that Drake knew. And now for the first time, I think they were seeing that it was Drake who the victim of this situation. Drake's mom got up because on his side, it was just Drake, his mom, and his brother. His dad was, because I don't think he had told his dad at this point. Like, I really don't. Because I think
his dad didn't know.
Yeah, Joe would have been there. Drake didn't address Brian. He addressed the people in the room. And he says, "You will forever have the memory of sitting in this room defending this person. And I will forever have the memory of this person you're defending, violating me and doing unspeakable acts and crimes. That's what I'll remember." It's not a very long trial because he pleads no contest to only 2 charges, and they just kind of accept it. And he is given the biggest fucking slap on the wrist. The only thing that could have gotten less is if he had just got probation, and he got 16 months in state prison, which if he's a good boy in prison, he'll only do 8 months. Right. The reason was because he received 41 character witness letters, which until this documentary remained sealed. Dan did not write a letter, nor did any other Nickelodeon exec write a letter on his behalf. Some very famous people did. Alan Thicke on Growing Pains, and Joanne Kearns, who played the mom, wrote a letter. Will Fidel, I don't know how to say his last name. It's
from Boy Meets World.
From Boy Meets World, wrote a letter, and so did Ryder Strong. Now, before we move on, I was like, how fucking dare they write this letter? Because basically, all the letters are saying that Brian got basically hoodwinked into this, that he was jail baited and all of this shit. And I couldn't fucking figure out why somebody would say that. Why would this was written time and time again in the letter? And this is something I was disappointed in the documentary, that I was like, what the fuck? Why is this not being looked at? So I Googled Ryder Strong because I had a big crush on Sean growing up, and I was like, don't be fucking trash. Why are you trash right now? So then I don't know if you guys know this, but they have a podcast. So it's Ryder Strong, Will, and then Danielle, whatever her last name, Fisher. I was like, I had it somewhere. And they addressed this before the documentary came out because they were known. They talked about it on February 19th in their podcast. And so I did find some things. And basically what Brian was telling people was that, yes, he's guilty of this. He didn't say who it was or how old the kid was, but basically that he was in fact jail baited, that this kid wanted it and then got mad at him for some reason and then turned him in, which suddenly makes sense if you're going to people who've known you and you've never done anything to them. And I'm not excusing these people for writing this, but I just wanted full context, which is why I looked it up, because I was like, why the fuck would 41 people do this? And they used the fact that Drake was listed as a John Doe. So no one could go fact check this with Drake. No one was going to get Drake's side of the story. Brian was planning to plead no contest. So even if these fuckers show up to court with him, they're never going to hear evidence. They're never going to hear
Yeah.
the tape of him confessing, which is why I think he pled no contest.
Because he
Because
knew. Because he knew.
right. Because if all this evidence like came pouring out that he did these things, these horrific things to Drake,
Yeah.
those 41 letters would have been gone, you know, and I'm not excusing people's actions, but a lot of people have come out since then and were like, if I had known what had really happened, I wouldn't have written the letter. Both Will and Ryder have stated that they wouldn't have done it, that
Did Ryder though? I know
yeah,
Will did. Okay.
I thought
Because
he did.
I don't think so. I listened to the clip, but it was just a clip. I didn't listen to the whole episode. If he did, good, but like I thought he didn't. I could be wrong.
He kind of like he does go in to start talking about Ryder because I'm reading it, and it basically he starts questioning like why we're adults like not questioning Brian being able to take kids out to lunch, doing these things with them.
Yeah.
As an adult now, he's looking back and being like, what the fuck? I think he was like, I agree with it. Like, that's what I'm thinking. Like, he agreed with Will's
Oh, okay.
sentiment. Like, he may not have said it specifically himself,
Uh-huh.
but it definitely, from what I'm reading, it seems like he was like in agreement of it. And if
Okay.
not, that makes you a terrible person because it's one thing to be like hoodwinked by someone you trusted because that's how predators work. And there are multiple types of this, which is that like Brian curated a life of people trusting him. And that includes people that he got to support him in the end. And there were some big names. In fact, there were some Disney Channel producers and executives, the Corells, and they were the producers on The Sweet Life of Zach and Cody. And they had worked with him on many projects. And they were like, oh, he wouldn't do this. Like James Marsden, who I love and am very disappointed in reading the letter, which basically was saying that like Brian is so torn up about this. Like this is like impacting him so deeply. Dude, he raped a 15-year-old boy.
Literally.
I hope he's upset because he's a bad, bad man. Like,
yeah.
That's the first step is feeling guilt. Like there's a lot of things, but and Joanne Carnes, who was the mom on Growing Pains, did release a statement that they showed, which said, I have now learned from that my letter of support was based completely on complete misinformation. Knowing what I know now, I would have never written the letter. So there are a lot of celebrities who did feel hoodwinked by this situation.
I don't know. I don't feel like it's an excuse because I'm sorry. If you're maybe it's just because of my point of view, but it's like if I had someone telling me, they're like, "Yes, I did this, but it was jail bait." Like, "No, fuck you. You knew it was a kid still."
Right.
Like, "Fuck
Right.
you. Fuck you." That was blame that got put onto me in my situations. So, no, fuck you. At the end of the day, I don't even give a fuck if like Drake's like, say he was like 17 about to turn 18 tomorrow. That's still a fucking
Minor.
child.
Right.
Like,
And he was
no,
a
fuck all of
41-year-old.
those
He was
people.
a
I don't give a shit.
40-something-year-old man.
Yeah, I don't give a
And
shit.
it's just in 2004, we victim blamed so much.
Mhm. It's fucking
This
disgusting.
was still during that, like the Me Too era hadn't even like happened for like 12 more, like what, 14 more years or something like that.
Yeah.
So when someone got sexually assaulted, it was what did they do to bring this on? And Brian took advantage of that and definitely did. And that's how he got 16 months, spent
Yeah.
8 months, and then got out, was made to register as a sex offender. When he was asked by Disney producers and executives, like, can you, like, what happened? He just told them it was resolved and they never did their due diligence. And that's the other thing is that, like, anyone who hired Brian after this, you're trash because he's registered as a sex offender against a child and you're a children's network. And how fucking dare you put more kids into this line of fire? Because 8 months, 16 months in prison, it's probably bad, but it's not going to change him. We see this with predators now. Like they can go to prison for like a decade and they don't change. So you think he's going to get like a slap on the wrist? He has an entire community of people backing him. He had people willing to overlook his conviction because they thought he was just fucking tricked by a jailbait kid, that everything was going to be fine. And that's not how this works. And fuck on like literally Nickelodeon, because Brian Peck isn't even the last predator who gets caught during this period of time. There's a man by the name of Ezeal Channel who literally doesn't even fish from the same pond. He brings a child to set. So he lures them with, like, look what I have access to, and then abuses him on set. And he's caught, and he's literally, so you have 3 huge predators caught in a 3-year period of time. Technically from April of 2003 to 2005, we're getting predators caught on children's productions. They're like, oh, we now, when they were questioned about this during the whole EZL channels thing, they're like, oh, we have now expanded our policy to include freelancers in our background checks. Why the fuck were you doing that to then? Excuse me. This is a person, an adult who has access to a child. When you're a foster home and you have like your own children and they become adults, they have to go through the same process of being like a background certification check and everything like that. This is children who are coming into an instance where there's a power dynamic that they can't control because they never have the upper hand. And the people who are supposed to protect them are just like, whatever, we'll hire whoever. We'll hire the predator because it's fine.
Just disgusting.
The interesting thing is that Drake never blames Dan. And I definitely think that Dan, like I said in the last one, or in this one, the last episode, predators can spot predators. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tara to finish talking about Dan.
Yes. Okay. So moving into like 2005 in this area that Drake's story ends at the time, tons of new shows come out. Like boom, 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 boom. It's like the next generation of the kid shows, right? And Dan is like pumping them out. So we got Zoe 101, iCarly, Victorious, Sam and Cat, et cetera, et cetera. And his success is growing and he's bringing in so much fucking money to Nickelodeon. At this point, the internet is becoming more mainstream. That's the whole reason like iCarly blew up, is because it was the first show of its kind, because Dan was very tech savvy and he was like, oh, he's going to capitalize off that. And that was very smart. That was a very smart thing to do. Right. Because all the teens and the tweens and stuff that watched iCarly, they're like, oh my God, so cool. Cause she has this like online blog, like video blog thing,
She has a YouTube channel essentially.
Yes, basically. And with that, they started an extension of these shows. He had like a site thing that he posted like bonus content. It was like behind the scenes, extra sketches, things like that. Now, this is where it gets very, very bad. And I am like, oh my God. So as you guys might know, Ariana Grande was Cat, and so she was on Victorious, and then so she went on to Sam and Cat. She was the subject of a lot of these bonus skits.
Because her character was kind of airbrainy, so.
Yes, yeah. It's very porn-coded, very, very porn-coded, unfortunately. There would be weird things. So, like, there was one where it looked like she was giving a hand job to a potato, basically, because she was trying to juice it, quote.
It was so inappropriate, like, watching it.
So bad.
I was like, oh no, this is terrible.
Yeah. And then there was other ones where it was like she was hanging off the bed and like pouring water on her and like making these like suggestive noises and stuff like that.
0 sense content-wise.
No, it made no fucking sense. And just like really, really bad things like that. At this point, he's the major golden boy because, like I said, lots of fucking money. So he's like, he's in control of things a lot more than other showrunners were at this. Well, I mean, pretty much most of his career as soon as he got successful. And there was like gross things in Victorious too. There was like a joke about being slapped in the face by a sausage and all this other shit. And like one girl out like is like, I'm gonna slap you with this. And she's like, yeah, do it. And it was just fucking weird. And there was another quote that said like, I want to be on the wood. I want to ride the wood and like shit like that. And then they had this like really awkward shake weight scene with Victoria Justice and like, I don't know if it was supposed to be her mom or whoever it was. And Zoe 101, there's a really, really bad one. So Alexa Nicholas, who was like one of the main characters on Zoe 101, she was like one of her little friends. She talks about the wardrobe and stuff. She was like, I was essentially made for the male gaze or for the teen boy gaze. Like they wore little skirts. They wore pink. They were very feminine. They wore bathing suits. And she's like, obviously, teens should be able to wear those things, but it was the context of it that was the problem. And one of the big ones, and gosh, she's been super vocal. Also, by the way, like So we'll talk about, I think I want to talk about this in the next episode, but Dan has posted a response video. She actually has a YouTube channel, which I subscribed us to. She's been talking about all this and like reacting to it and all of that. So you guys, if you're interested, go check it out. There's this scene where her and Jamie Lynn Spears are like, I don't know where the fuck they are, like at school or something. And
The bookstore, it kind of looks like.
Yeah, something.
Like
And she calls it the backpack episode. So she's got this like jelly.
It's supposed to be like a candy. Yeah.
Like some kind of candy thing. Yeah. And essentially, this is like another one where it's like super fucking evident. It's another one of those like cum shot things. Right. And she said it was just so fucking awkward because she's like, I like did the scene where it's like I was trying to open it and like Jamie was trying to help me and then it squirts her face. And she said that like one of the PAs like walks up with a syringe with this fucking goo and like fucking, squirts her in the face. And it's just like, it's straight up that. It's straight up that. And she's
all the boys on the set.
All the boys on the set fucking said it. And that they said something. Because they were all watching. Because, like, she steps off, screen. And the boys are like, oh my God, that's a cum shot. And she didn't even know what that meant. So she was like, what? What the fuck does that mean? And it's just like, if it's this evident to children, just saying.
Right.
And basically, like, Dan just could not be stopped at this point. Like, there was a cameraman that was interviewed, and he was like, I would kind of question it, and Dan would just always shut it down. And it was just like very uncomfy and like inappropriate because he would be like, zoom on their feet, zoom in on their tongues while they're licking, whatever, like all of these things. And like, there's so many scenes across different shows of this whole cum shot scenario. It's just disgusting.
Dan was making porn for perverts. Like he was making the content he wanted to watch, but doing it on Nickelodeon's dime.
Yep. There's also like someone from the wardrobe department who she remains anonymous, but like she also talks about like the massages and all the creepy shit and all of that stuff. Well, jump ahead to 2014. So at this point, Dan's been with Nickelodeon for like what, 20 something years or whatever.
20 years.
20 years. He gets their Lifetime Achievement Award. So, everything this piece of shit fucking wants, all this recognition, and it's like celebrating him and like a bunch of the cast, like everyone from his shows except Jeanette McCurdy. And they were like, why isn't she here? She's one of the main characters on like multiple of his shows, just brought up before her book. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. If you do the audiobook, she narrates it. That's how I listen. That's how I listen to a lot of like memoir.
Yeah, me too.
Type things. She's got all these quotes about the creator, which we talked about before. And she says stuff I wrote down that like stood out was, I feel like the creator has two distinct sides. One is generous and over the top complimentary. The other side is mean spirited, controlling, and terrifying. The creator knows how to make someone feel worthless. And that's just like goes to show like that's been the theme since the 90s with him. Like that is the same behavior he's been allowed to have. And it's just like horrible. And it's people know this, but eventually it led to another internal investigation on him. This is his second one. And they ruled that Dan was not going to interact with the cast anymore. Like he needed to be isolated. So he had to be in his office. And it's so funny because like, it's not funny, but it's like, are you fucking give me a break? We see like little like flashes of being like, oh, Dan said this because he did respond to certain things in this documentary. And he was like, oh, it was my choice to take the notes from my office. Da, da, da. And it's like, no, it wasn't, because you would be right up in there because that's what you've done this whole fucking time. If you were someone who was a little more hands off, sure, then I would believe it. But like, no. And
he was kicked out.
He got two more shows out before he did get kicked out. And those released in 2017. And then that's also like the Me Too movement started and all of that. And then like the lady from the costume wardrobe department, she called the union to tell about Dan, to be like, hey, shit's still going on. Like, what the fuck are we going to do? And that's what led to that other investigation. At this point, the internet is like a big thing because, like I said, 2017. So rumors are online, all this other stuff. And he was fired. He was let go. He was given a severance of $7 million. He should have got nothing. And he kind of went in the dark. He tried to resurface in 2021 and he did a thing with the New York Times and was like saying how he was ready to come back to kid TV and all this shit. And I'm like, bro, why the fuck? Like, what? No, nobody wants you. Go away. We don't need you here. They start talking about Amanda again and like all her stuff. Like we said in earlier episodes, we're not going to obviously go into super detail, that just out of respect for her. That's the thing. We don't know what kind of trauma she went through for sure. We know like certain things she said on her burner accounts. If you guys want us to deep dive onto like that aspect, please let us know because we will. And then it's just, it kind of like, it honestly just kind of like closes there and just all of these people reiterating, we don't, like, people pay the fuck attention, hold people accountable. We don't need another Dan. There's plenty of Dans out there, I'm sure. There's plenty of Brian Pecks, unfortunately. And it's just, it's heartbreaking. And it's just, I mean, I know you have too. Like, I've known for a long time, obviously, the entertainment industry is extremely dark. I think most people kind of know. And I feel like it was a good time for this to come out because Gen Z may not, like younger Gen Z may not really be super privy to stuff. You know what I mean? So I think it's good they came out. It speaks a lot how many people didn't come forward because like that's I think that the costumer or somebody that's what Christy said in the first episode. She was like, there's a reason it's only me and Jenny. Like everybody else is still scared of Dan. Like that's the thing. He may not work for them anymore, but he obviously still has influence. So,
and also you have to look at it from the perspective of in today's world, it still happens for sure, but it's easier to take to Twitter. It's easier to take to Instagram and be like, this is what's happening to me. I don't like this. There's been like, I think back to like just even co-stars, like the Leah Michelle shit that came out of like her bullying people on set. And I think with the internet being what it is, as a community, like a lot of people want to be like social justice warriors. We want people to like, I feel like Tara and I are that way. We want people to get help. We want people to like get their stories out there. I don't want to say it's harder for people to get away with shit, but we're making it a little more difficult for people to be predators because there's a real chance that if you continue down this lifestyle, if you're in that lifestyle and you continue down, it's not just going to be like back in the day when like Brian Peck got arrested. It's going to be like, oh my God, I gave myself a thumbs up. Sorry. It's gonna be on Front Street. Some child actor is gonna take to Twitter, is gonna like blast this person right out the gate. And I'm glad that we have this kind of thing, but it also makes it harder for kids nowadays to spot this kind of shit because grooming is so fucking difficult to spot when you're a child.
Yeah.
It's why groomers are successful because they find people who have voids in their life. Like I went through the whole like breakup of my parents. With me, my cycle of being able to fall into a groomer was the fact that I had been sexually assaulted by a family member and was dealing with that by repressing it. And then an adult man who is 7 years older than me when I'm 14 is showing me love and attention. Why would I question that? I was hurt and someone's willing to love me. The victim blaming thing, like I didn't come forward because I assumed that people would be like, this is on you. You pursued him as much as he pursued you. There were times where he walked away from you and you chased him. Not that it was the real truth is that he manipulated it so that I was chasing him, so that it wasn't just him coming after me. I was as much, if not more, invested in this. And it's not the same as what Drake went through, but like he trusted that man and people trusted Dan. And I'm not accusing Dan of anything because I don't have any proof and I don't have any court cases, but like,
he provenly like was committing harassment and a toxic work environment. So,
and all of those jelly snot fake cum shots, that's a form of sexual harassment.
Yep.
And he wrote it. You're telling me that this man looked at like young Jamie Lynn Spears and thought, it's really funny. Let me throw goo on her face. No.
It's disgusting.
It was him living out some sick fucking fantasy, and I can't be convinced otherwise.
Agreed.
Well, this has been an experience and a half. It's trauma.
Yeah.
I was really anxious about doing these episodes today because I didn't actually think it was going to affect me as much as it did, and it did. But the great thing about that is I recently refound one of my favorite childhood movies because I decided to Google it.
What is it?
I always tell people this and they're like, I don't understand. So there's this Disney movie called Fun and Fancy Free. It starts with like Jiminy Cricket and he's like in like a little planter, which looks like he's on a little river. Basically, he finds this like audio story told by like a famous artist called Bongo. And Bongo is my parents had it on Betamax because that's my parents had Betamax. And it was the story of Bongo, who is this circus bear, which is really sad. And then he gets into the wild and he finds his love and he has to like save her from this big bad man. And I've been so like stressed about this. I've tried to watch it 4 times and I keep falling asleep because I'm just like,
oh no.
We're going to go ahead and wrap up today. And if you can, check out the documentary. It was really well done. And I'm anxious to see 5 to see who it is. And we will see you guys in the next episode. So bye, guys.
Bye.